In this final section on event sourcing, I'm going to briefly describe one great benefit of event sourcing, namely how it enables you to write modular business logic, which can be deployed either as a monolith or as microservices. So it can let you sort of defer when you switch to a microservice architecture while simultaneously making it easier to switch to a microservice architecture. So I've mentioned this earlier. So one issue around the microservice architecture is when to use it. At the start of a project, particularly if you're a startup, you do not have the problems that the microservice architecture solves. You don't have a complex code base. You don't have a large number of users. And so if you were to use the microservice architecture, it wouldn't really help you necessarily, and it would actually slow you down. The trouble is that later on, when your business is successful and it's grown and your code base has become much more complex and you have and it's handling a large amount of load, then that's the time you want to migrate to a microservices architecture. The problem is that your application is likely to have a lot of tangled dependencies, and so refactoring your tangled monolith into a set of microservices can be quite painful. There's a real tension here, and it's hard to know exactly what to do. But what's really interesting is that the approach that I've described, namely the use of aggregates and the use of event sourcing, actually leads you to a modular domain model that could be deployed either as a monolith or as a set of microservices. So in other words, if you think about the traditional domain model, it consists of a tightly coupled set of domain classes that relies heavily on using ACID transactions. Whereas, on the other hand, if you look at a domain model that's built using event sourcing, it consists of a set of loosely coupled aggregates that do not rely on ACID transactions and instead leverage an eventually consistent transaction model. So what that actually lets you do is package up all of your aggregates inside a monolithic application. There perhaps is a little overhead because you're using event sourcing and so on, but it does mean that your business logic is modular. So in other words, there's no big ball of mud to untangle when you want to migrate to a microservice architecture. So we can then switch to a microservice architecture, put our aggregates in different services, and at that point leverage the benefits of the microservice architecture without having to go through a very difficult refactoring process where it's quite challenging to untangle everything and break it apart. So that's one really valuable feature of using event sourcing plus aggregates.